Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Women of Banking. I've got two special CEOs with me joining. I've got Deena and Steph. Deena is CEO of Southland Credit Union and Steph is CEO of Sunward. Amazing women leaders in the ecosystem. Thought of inviting them and chatting about the next generation of leadership in credit unions. It will be a fun conversation, a candid one, as you know. Maybe let's start the conversation with a question I wanted to start with. Let's start with Deena, and we'll go to Steph. Since this panel is specifically about women leadership and how women leadership is shaping the next gen of credit unions. So, Deena, if I ask you, how does an amazing or a great leadership mean to you? Because you stepped onto the role like 7 months back, right? And now, obviously, coming into a new role, you might have changed or you have changed a few things that were different earlier, the credit union. So, how does the new role as well as a great leadership look like?
Yeah, I think actually it's fairly consistent because, and I said this even when I was interviewing with the board, that I think clarity is kindness. And so I really believe that coming in and setting very clear expectations and being very transparent with those expectations is the best thing to do, especially as I came in, I started in December and I really needed to build some trust with the team and the organization. And so what I've promised them is that I will always be transparent, not always like what they're hearing, but I'm going to be as transparent as possible.
Since Steph is a like a veteran CEO for years. She was with TDCU for like forever being CEO, and now it's Sunward for the last almost 5 years, former Sandy Adapt. Steph, what are your 2 cents?
Yeah. Our role as the leader of the organization is really to accomplish the organization's objectives, right? The vision in partnership with the board and, what we see the organization of the future. And so the leadership is really around how do we create alignment amongst all those stakeholders to make sure that happens. That's with our board, with our leadership team, our employees, our communities, our regulators, all the stakeholders that are engaged in that. And, I believe we do that by creating energy, by empowering others, and also through empathy to make sure that, everybody is staying together as you go on that journey.
Yeah, very well taken points. Now, actually, to get back to my white papers because I will take notes. So don't think I'm ignoring both of you guys. I'm taking notes, right? So these are important points. Moving on to the next question, right? So in terms of leadership lesson, I mean, maybe start with Steph, right? So it's not your first rodeo. You've been doing it for years now in the CEO shoe for long. What is the biggest leadership lesson, Steph, that you've learned in your career throughout your long, illustrious career?
Yeah. A number of years ago, I read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which had a huge impact on me as a leader because one of the central messages is that we don't control what is happening around us. But what we do control is how we react to what is happening around us. And so that's something that I've really carried forward as a leader is, my reactions to what happened, they matter. Everyone is observing those and taking those as cues is what's important and, what does the organization and them individually need to be focused on. And that's just really something that I carry with me every day from a leadership perspective.
Interesting thought process. Deena?
Yeah, I guess I would say don't necessarily maybe wait until you're 100% ready, right? I think that as I've kind of gone through my career, the reason that I had the opportunity to, be here and serve Southland and our communities and our members is that they gave me chances before maybe they thought I was ready. And then what I did is I seized those opportunities. And so I would say as, someone's maybe coming up in leadership, I try to do the same with my team. I try to, give them opportunities. And, even if it's maybe an opportunity to present in front of the board and they haven't had a chance to do that yet, but, I try to make sure that it's developing leaders. And I'd say, it's okay to step into something maybe if you even don't think you're 100% ready to do it.
This reminds me, Deena, of maybe a couple of years back when you were still at Stanford. I was always root for you and ask you, I think I used to ask you, Deena, when are you becoming the next CEO, right? So this just reminds me of those days when we used to have discussions that when I becoming the CEO and, incredibly proud. I mean, the day you told me that, yeah, you're going to take up a CEO role, I was like, yes, one win in my life. So happy for that.
Thank you.
Yep. Great.
It's a journey. Steph would probably tell you too, right? I'm sure you have your own story about the journey to becoming a CEO.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So why don't we talk about that then? Let's not go skip by. Let's talk candid. So Steph, why don't you share about your journey? And then Deena yours.
Yeah. It was interesting. So pretty early in my career, I worked for a credit union and a leader who really identified that capability in me probably before I even recognized it in myself, right? She was someone who said, I think you're going to be a great CEO someday, and you can and you should be a CEO someday. And so really that recognition, sort of sparked for me like that as a career path, and then the intentionality of the decisions I made to get to that point. And so yeah, it's just for me having somebody believe in me and seeing the capability and capacity to do that is what sparked me on a journey that eventually led me to get there.
Yeah, feel free. I mean, I'm not going to ask you guys to jump in. I mean, please feel free.
Sure.
It's your thing.
I think for me, it was working for an organization that believed that you could lead an area outside of your functional area. So when I introduce myself, I always, talk about myself as I'm a marketer by trade. Marketers people don't necessarily think of a marketer as someone who's going to be a CEO, right? Usually there's a financial background or something of that sort. But I worked for an organization that gave me the opportunity to lead areas that weren't my functional area. And in fact, actually, the executive recruiting firm that placed me here at Southland, that was one of the advices he said to me. He said, we're having a hard time finding candidates to become CEOs because it seems that everybody's always staying in their function area, right? A lender's always a lender. And, you got the finance person's always a finance person. And, when I worked for Westcom, Darren Williams believed in kind of shuffling us around and giving us the opportunity to get experience outside the functional area. And it's that experience, I think, that helped me then move into this role, because I was able to, speak to the board about strategies, that involve the whole credit union, right? And so, I say that I say to my leadership team here, there's a reason we're all sitting in on, different calls, and you obviously want to be very, you want to be sensitive to people's time. You don't want to waste their time. But as I'm maybe trying to develop my leadership team here, I'll say to them, you should jump on the call, with this vendor so that you can learn, about, why we're doing a change with our balance sheet, maybe why we're doing a loan sale. You should learn this because it's going to help make you a better leader for the credit union.
I started my career as a marketer too, Deena.
Steph, I love that.
I didn't know that you were a marketer. Okay, interesting. Small. Let's talk about advice. I mean, obviously, so many friends of mine who ask for advices, not in terms of what to do, advices that if they were to walk the path of becoming a CEO. Now, I know people who've been interviewed thrice, 4 times, more than that, right? And they've at times realized that they were 100% suitable for that role. But it didn't work out because of multiple extrinsic factors. I don't want to talk about it because both of you had walked that path of becoming CEOs, becoming women, of women CEOs. And that is extremely tough. I know it's not easy. So maybe any one of you can start with answering this question. So if you were to give a piece of advice to someone, specifically a woman, right, who aspires to becoming a CEO one day of a credit union, what would that advice be? Or maybe a series of advice? I mean, any one of you can maybe jump in.
Yeah, I'll maybe go ahead and jump in first on that then. Again, I'd say, stay curious, right? So, learn as much as you can about the different areas of the credit union so that when you're going in and, interviewing for the role, you're able to speak kind of cross-functionally. I do think it's going in and having a vision, specifically in, the interview process, going in and, being able to let the board know that you've done the research on the credit union and you have a strategy and you have a vision. And then, I would also say that I had someone said this to me is you have to find your board. And I do think that's important. Steph kind of talked earlier about how, being in this seat, you're representing the board, you're representing your members, you're representing the community. And there does need to be a fit between, the CEO and what the actions of the CEO is going to do, and the support of the board, because you don't want that to get misaligned. So I think that those would be, kind of all different pieces of advice I would give. How about you, Steph?
Yeah, really aligned to what you're saying, Deena, around knowing your why, your own personal why. Like, why do you want to be a CEO and what is it that you hope to accomplish? Because often it can just feel like, oh, that's the next step, right? That's the next progression. But it is so different from being a functional leader, right? You're not sort of in the business, you're with the business. And again, you're balancing all these different pieces that know really why what you want to accomplish. And to your point, that why is going to resonate with an organization that is aligned to that why. So that doesn't mean that not getting a role is necessarily a setback. It's more not a match with your why, but being really clear for yourself what that is, I think makes those discussions easy and also helps you recognize like what's right for you and, the ability to use your own superpowers in an organization.
I like the way it's concise. The why is a good way to say it.
That's the reason I got you ladies, right? You are those concise, badass CEOs, simple, for the lack of better words. Everyone, it took me years. It took me years to know these CEOs. It was not easy. It was not easy, but yeah, I've got the best in the group. Thank you again for doing this for us. These pieces of advice are really golden nuggets. People have reached out to me and told me when you talk to CEOs and they share their journey. This reminds me of another CEO. Catherine is CEO of a credit union based in SoCal. I'm just forgetting the name. Catherine, sorry. Valley First, I believe. Yeah. So she was rejected, I think, 5 or 6 times just before she took up the role. And it was like mind-boggling, right? When I hear those stories, I cannot just be more surprised at how can this even happen. But still, not losing that race and getting to the finish line, that's what I respect about you guys. Enormously proud. For the entire family of Women of Banking, we are enormously proud of both of you, what you've achieved in life. It doesn't matter what people talk about, but remember, there's a brother sitting out there in New York who's always proud about what you guys do and achieve every single day. That's quite important.
My husband used
Thank
to
you.
explain it as reps. My husband would say, think about when you're like exercising, it's reps. So every interview is a rep.
He's not wrong. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I also believe that, different type of people have different type of leadership, and it is influenced by the type of leaders you are surrounded by. So there's a very common saying that you are possibly, almost similar to the 5 people who surround you every day. Your average of those 5 people. That means there's a big influence on type of people who actually mentored you, took you under their arms. So if I were to ask both of you, the specific questions, who has been the biggest influence for both of you, in this journey?
Steph, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I mentioned it earlier, having a leader very early in my career that said, you can do this. Like, this is the right path for you. And believing in me, it really has been so tremendously influential in terms of supporting the decisions that I made and thinking about myself in that role. I don't know that I had really thought about myself as a CEO prior to her saying, you can do this. And it's impacted, my life and career since then.
And I'd say similarly in that, I worked for a leader, the chief operating officer at Westcom at the time, who, she's the one that gave me the opportunity, right? So she kind of plucked me out of marketing and, was the first person to say, okay, I want you to lead, this functional area. She put me over human resources, right? Marketing and human resources don't, but I used to always say, okay, I'm leading the external brand and now I'm leading the internal brand. This is why, it makes sense. And so I would say that she was actually the very first person I texted when I found out that I received the role was, I immediately sent her a text and said, I won't be here if you, hadn't years ago given me this opportunity. But then in addition to that, I would say, and I tell this, I was sitting with a bunch of CEOs a couple of weeks ago, kind of at lunch, and I was saying this, that I had the opportunity to work for one CEO who was more on the operations kind of service side. And so he really showed me and gave me the kind of passion for the member experience and why the member, kind of always mattered. And then, I had an opportunity to work for a CEO who came up more on the financial path. And she clearly, obviously still had the passion for members, but I think she's the one that gave me more of the schooling on the balance sheet, a strategy that I maybe hadn't, had because I came up through the marketing way. And so I feel like I worked for two leaders that, gave me such lessons in both of those. And that's going to, hopefully help lead me to, leading Southland and its members to success.
So my hypothesis still remains correct that your average or sum total of the people you're surrounded with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Now, it's a very common thing that I've seen. Obviously, as much as I love and respect the movement, right, the creative movement, I still punch holes because I love the movement. So I have full right to talk about what's wrong in them. It's to change. It's my home. Simple. One thing which I don't hate, but I don't understand that succession planning becomes a bit difficult, and that's the reason a lot of M&As do happen because there is no leaders in succession. And building the next level of leadership is very important in my 2 cents, not only in credit union world, across the entire ecosystem. If you cannot identify the next set of leaders, you're not doing justice to your work, to your role, is what I do. Because I can tell you, if I leave the podcast tomorrow, this podcast won't stop. Because I know exactly the type of people who come in and we build an engine around it. That's what I'm talking about. So I want to ask both of you a question that how do you build an empire empower the next generation of leaders? Because it's not easy. Obviously, I'm not asking you guys to plan successions right now, but as a next layer, the EVP layer, the people who run the entire show for you, how do you build and empower them? It's not easy to build leadership and build sustainable leadership.
Yeah. Deena, you want to?
Sure, I can start off with that. So I think you're right. Obviously, I'm 7 months in, so I'm not necessarily trying to, build a succession plan here at Southland, but I do think it's my responsibility to help, contribute to the next leadership in the industry. I very much have taken that approach since I've been, started here. Again, I've only been here 7 months, and I talked, a little bit about that earlier, right? It's asking my senior team to join other functional key meetings on strategy and help be a part because, even if maybe the runway doesn't work for them to be the CEO here at Southland, it would be great if, they could go be a CEO at another credit union somewhere, I always have said, I think you're only as good as, the people that you lead. And so I hope that I can help, contribute to building future CEOs, or if they don't want to be a CEO, whatever it is that their path is, COO, some level of executive. But I do think getting the cross-functional experience. Here you've got both Steph and I, right? We came from the marketing side, and we've talked about the fact that both of us were given a chance by someone, and so we should be paying that forward and giving someone else a chance.
Yeah, I think we, certainly CEO succession is a big part of that succession story, and maybe we emphasize that as an organization, but also, I think succession is so much more than only having people ready for the CEO role, right? And so we've been really intentional at Sunward about how do we build a deeper bench, both from a functional expertise, but then also from a leadership expertise. So, one is providing, some structured learning in the organization. So we have a program for leaders at like a mid-level leader that has tools that they can use to really advance their skills as a leader and bring those forward. And then just really providing a lot of exposure to executive routines. Deena, I think you mentioned like giving people an opportunity to give presentations and to take ownership of different parts of the organization in a way that really stretches them and provides context and learning from an organizational perspective. And let people practice, which isn't perfect, right? It's a practice, and helping them learn and grow and develop. It's so much more our role as we get into our careers is, I love the point that Deena made around you're only as good as the team around you. So how do you make sure that you're helping everybody else level up at the same time as you're leveling yourself up as well, right? Continuing to learn and advance and grow and stretch. I think all those things are important. And then the last thing I would say from a leadership succession is just being open about what the role is really like, right? And helping others learn and see just enables people, and not just like on a permanent perspective, but allows you to go on vacation and, have others get that opportunity to practice and learn and understand the things that you're seeing as you're thinking about the role, and really being intentional about that openness with the team around, what it takes and also what you're thinking about so that they're thinking about that too. and really supporting you as a leader. Because they want to support their CEO or their senior leader in the organization. So giving them the opportunity and the tools to do that.
Makes sense. I mean, in the interest of time, one last question to both of you. Maybe let's start with Steph. If I were to ask you, give yourself one piece of advice to a younger version of yourself, maybe 20 years back, what would that be? One or maybe a couple of advices which you think would have given to yourself 20 years back, it would have been better than learning it through the course of time.
Yeah. Well, first, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? And so you got to think about the long game and the long sustainable game around how to manage that yourself and from an organizational perspective. I think, many of us became successful in our careers because we're the people that got things done, right? So, there's a challenge. We just got to work. I did. I'm just put my shoulder into it and just start coming from a task perspective. But really the ability to take a step back and think, how do I need to get this done? What are the resources? What are the talents? What kind of development do we need? Or do we need to hire or put somebody in charge versus doing? Is really learning that lesson earlier would have been valuable for me. And then the second thing, and I think this is touching on something that Deena said earlier around just staying curious, right? Really being open to opportunities and perspectives and taking that sort of growth mindset versus this is the way things get done, or how could we do this? What's the next opportunity? How do we remain curious? Those are things that I would have wanted to learn those earlier.
So Steph, I love it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I will have you know that my board chair said that to me at my first week of work. I love that. That resonates so much with me. But I think I very much aligned with what Steph said. I've just say it a little bit different. So, I'd say the hiring decisions do matter, right? Because Steph is right. The reason we got put in certain positions or had opportunity is because we were the doers, right? We got stuff done. But as you move up in your career, what you do realize is you can't just be doing it all. And so you really do at that point have to rely on a team or others to help you out. And so I would say, make smart hiring decisions. And then I'm going to go back to my advice at the beginning, which is, I think that clarity is kind. And so, making sure that you're transparent. If someone isn't, performing well in the team, don't let it just continue. It's not fair to them, right? And it's not going to help you either. And so I think being able to go back and be transparent, I'd say that's key. But the team matters. The team really, it matters.
This was a fully loaded conversation, everyone. So this was amazing having these two leaders come and sharing their thoughts, wisdom, and so many things that I could never think of because they are running successful credit unions around. And I wish Steph and Deena, both of you, all the best and happy 4th of July.
4th of July, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.